Welcome back to Project GTI. Today we're going to be changing the brake fluid on our Mark V Golf. It's often a job that's overlooked and you're actually supposed to change your brake fluid every 2 years. So we've no idea when the last time our fluid was changed, so it makes sense to do it. And we also want to change out the standard .4 fluid with a racing version which has a much higher boiling point because we're going to be using our car on track. On this particular car there are basically two stages to bleeding the brakes. There's a basic stage and an advanced stage. For the basic stage, you just need jack, axle stands, brake fluid, a pressurized brake bleeder, some flexible hose, and an 11mm spanner. And for the advanced stage, which isn't essentially, you don't have to do this, but you do, if you want to do it, then you're going to need something like launch or VAGCOM to plug into the car, and this is to activate the ABS pump in the car. We'll get to that stage later on. Obviously, brakes are a safety critical component of the car, and the methodology, the system of bleeding the brakes does vary from vehicle to vehicle, so you must check the correct procedure for your car before you proceed. So let's get started. The first thing we need to do is we're taking a Draper pressure bleeder here. This is a manual one-man bleeder, which means you can bleed the brakes by yourself. You don't need a second person. So first job, we need to fill up the reservoir with new clean brake fluid. So brake fluid is what's called a hygroscopic substance, which means that it absorbs water over time. And that's actually the reason that we have to change the brake fluid in the first place, because water gets into the system when the water gets hot, turns into steam, and you can't compress the steam as much as you can the brake fluid, and gives you a spongy brake pedal. Now before we go any further, it's important to point out brake fluid's pretty nasty stuff. It will strip the paint on your car, so make sure you keep it well clear of any painted surfaces. Wear gloves, keep it away from children and pets. So now we have to remove the cap on the brake fluid reservoir and replace it with the cap that comes with the brake bleeder kit. Now we need to pressurize the system to about 10 psi. Any higher than that and you could damage some of the seals inside the brake master cylinder, so just keep an eye on the pressure. That's about right. So unlike conventional brake systems where you would start bleeding the brakes from the caliper that's furthest away from the master cylinder, usually the back left, on this car we have to start at the front left. So we start bleeding this caliper, need to remove the little rubber dust cap, make sure that the bleed nipple is clean, get your flexible hose, make sure that's clean, and attach it to the... first you need to attach your spanner, then attach the clear hose to the bleed nipple. Make sure that it's a really good tight fit as well, because you don't want any air to be able to get in or out. There we go. Now we're ready to start bleeding the fluid out. We've got the spanner ready, we've got our hose, and we've got our jar which has measurements on the side as well, which is useful because we need to make sure we get at least 200 mils out of this caliper. So just wind open the bleed nipple until you start to see fluid coming out. You don't want to remove the bleed nipple at all. So we've got 200 mils here. We'll just let a little bit more come out and then we'll tighten up the bleed nipple. So as you can see, the colour of the brake fluid is pretty manky and dirty and grimy, and that's supposed to be a kind of nice golden colour, a bit like engine oil. So the time to change was probably right. And once you've tightened the bleed nipple, don't forget to replace the little rubber dust cover. Now we repeat the procedure for the front right. So we're just going to empty the measuring jug of the old used brake fluid back into the original container so that we can bring it back to the recycling centre to dispose of responsibly. The next caliper in the sequence is the rear left, and the bleed nipple's a bit harder to get to, so you probably won't be able to see with the camera, but it's the same procedure. This time we need to release more 300 mils of fluid rather than 200. Here you can see in the tubing, these are bubbles that were trapped inside the brake system, so we're getting plenty of air out, which is great. Now we've done all 4 brakes, we need to do the clutch because it works off the same system. The clutch slave cylinder is kind of down just on top of the gearbox, and you'll need to remove the engine cover to get to it. So we release the bleed nipple just the same way, but we need to release just 100 mils of fluid from the clutch cylinder. So as far as the basic brake bleeding method is concerned, we're almost done. All we need to do now is just get the last bit of fluid out of this hose, and we need to release the pressure from the system. Now what you're probably going to find is that the brake fluid reservoir is going to be very full now, and you're going to need to remove some of the fluid. So you need to get a turkey baster or something like that and extract some fluid so that it's at the right level. So once you have enough fluid extracted and you have it between the maximum and minimum levels on the brake fluid reservoir, you can refit the original cap, refit the engine cover, and then you're good to test the brakes. Most DIYers will probably stop here, test the system and call it job done, which is absolutely fine, because not everybody has access to expensive diagnostic equipment. You will have replaced the vast majority of the brake fluid and got rid of any trapped air at this stage. However, to do a proper belt and braces job and completely flush out the old fluid, you need to hook up VAGCOM or launch and follow the relevant ABS or ESP functional tests. This process purges the ABS pump and can release a considerable amount of additional dirty brake fluid. What we're about to do is activate the ABS pump, apply pressure to the brake pedal and bleed the brakes again one by one, in sequence while the pump is running, so you're going to need a helper. With the pump running, gently apply pressure to the brake pedal and get your helper to bleed the brakes in sequence, which goes front left, front right, rear left, then rear right. Before the pedal gets to the floor, you need to close the bleed nipple. With the bleed nipple closed, release the brake pedal, then reapply pressure to the brake pedal and reopen the bleed nipple. Repeat the process until the fluid flows clean and free from air bubbles. It's important not to keep the bleed nipple open on the upstroke of the brake pedal as it can draw in air. You can stop and start the ABS pump using launch and repeat the process for each caliper. So that's us more or less done. We bled the brakes again in the exact same sequence as we did the first time. The dust covers are back on, all the bleed nipples tightened up again, engine cover back on. So all that's left to do is put the road wheels back on, torque them up to 120 Newton meters, and we can drop the car back down onto the ground and test the brakes thoroughly before we're back onto the public roads.